All right. Welcome to another deep dive.
Yeah.
This time we are going all the way back to the beginning, to
Yeah.
the early life of, this literary giant,
Right.
J.R.R. Tolkien.
Right.
Everybody knows the Lord of the Rings, but
Right.
what we want to do is go
Yeah.
even deeper than just a straight biography
Yeah.
and try to find the things,
Yeah.
things that influenced his imagination,
Right.
that made him become who he was.
Yeah, absolutely.
And our source for this is going to be a biography called J.R.R. Tolkien, O Pai do O Senhor dos Anéis, which is
I like that.
Portuguese.
Yes, that title.
So, So what we're going to do is we're going to go through this biography and try to pick out the most important events and influences and things like that that really shaped him as a person.
Absolutely. Trying to understand really, what shaped this imagination.
Exactly, yeah.
That created this incredible world.
Okay, so if we go all the way back to the very beginning to his childhood.
Right back.
We find him in Bloemfontein in South Africa. And, we learn that his younger brother, Hilary, was born in 1894.
Right.
And, we get a little portrait of Ronald, as he was known at the time.
Yeah.
Young Ronald, a robust little guy with fair hair, blue eyes, already talking and drawing. Even to the point where he would entertain the bank staff when he would go with his father to his work.
I love that. Yeah. And he was described as a real young Saxon, like a
right.
Yeah, his dad called him that affectionately, really a young Saxon.
Right.
Yeah. So even back then they could see, like a strong, sturdy English boy.
Yeah. So his dad, Arthur Rule Tolkien, was a bank manager there in Bloemfontein.
Right.
But things were not entirely idyllic there in South Africa. Yeah. There were some serious environmental challenges.
Yeah, a lot of challenges.
Yeah.
One of the big ones was the drought. It was like an intense drought.
Right.
Trade was ruined. There was a plague of locusts as well.
Oh, wow.
And the locusts ruined a really promising harvest.
Right.
And all of this cast like a really somber atmosphere over the whole region.
And it sounds like, these difficulties kind of played into Arthur's decision to stay in Bloemfontein.
Yeah, he decided he was going to stay.
Right.
And that meant delaying his return to England.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure was a very hard thing for Mabel, Tolkien's mom, to deal with.
And it seems like, as a result of this, Ronald didn't really have that many strong memories.
Yeah, very few.
Of his dad from this time.
Yeah.
It says his only clear recollection of him from this period is watching him paint A.R. Tolkien on a family chest.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an amazing image to have in your head. Yeah.
And it seems like, this kind of absence.
Yeah.
And then eventual, death of his father.
Yeah.
That theme kind of runs throughout his life and his work.
It does, yeah.
So then in April of 1895, Mabel and the two boys, they set sail for England.
Right.
On the SS Gulf.
Right.
And so this is a big move.
Yeah, huge move.
For the family, and especially I think for young Ronald,
Yeah.
because he was old enough to have these memories of South Africa, and then they start to fade.
Yeah, they start to fade.
He remembers like a few Afrikaans words and that feeling of like a dry, dusty landscape.
Yeah.
But his brother was too young.
Of course,
to remember any of it.
Yeah.
And tragically, Arthur, died in Bloemfontein.
Yeah.
Never made it back to England.
Yeah.
And so, this is a pretty big event.
Huge. Yeah.
In Tolkien's life.
Yeah, and at such a young age as well. He probably wouldn't have been able to like fully process it.
Right.
But that loss and being uprooted from one home, it's got to be a massive thing for a kid to go through.
Yeah, and so they moved to Birmingham, England.
Yeah.
Which must presented, all new challenges for Mabel, for his mom.
Totally.
She faced some financial hardship there. It says that most of their capital was tied up in bonanza mines.
Right.
And, they were getting dividends, but it was barely enough to cover their living expenses.
Yeah.
And so this really speaks volumes about,
Yeah.
Mabel's character.
It does.
Because right away she's already thinking about, her son's education.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, she was a well-educated woman herself, right? She knew Latin, French, German, painting, drawing, piano. She initially tried to teach the boys herself, but her goal was to get them into King Edward's School, which was a prestigious school.
Yeah.
The same one that her husband had gone to.
Right.
So yeah, she really had a very clear vision for their futures.
So she was really trying to give them the best possible opportunities.
Oh yeah.
Even in these really difficult circumstances.
Absolutely.
And so she had to move them to cheaper lodgings.
Yeah.
And it just speaks to her resilience.
Yeah, tough woman.
Yeah. And so it was there in Birmingham that we see the introduction of another big influence on young Ronald.
Okay.
And this is Mabel's parents.
Right.
The Suffield family.
I get Suffield.
And they were engravers.
Right.
And Mabel, she had that artistic ability as well.
She did, yeah.
But there was a story in the family about how they received a coat of arms.
Oh, wow.
From King William V.
Okay.
And there was also like a distant connection that probably wasn't true to a Lord Suffield.
Right.
But it's interesting how families have these stories, and they kind of get embellished over time.
Yeah, I wonder.
And you can't help but wonder.
I wonder if that had any impact on Tolkien.
Yeah.
As a creator of stories.
Right, because he was so meticulous about the histories and genealogies and things like that.
Right, so much detail in his stories.
Yeah.
You can't help but wonder if there's a connection there.
Yeah, so it seems like he became much closer to his mom's side of the family than his dad's side.
Right.
He would visit his grandfather.
Right.
John Benjamin Tolkien. But it wasn't very often, probably because he was, quite elderly.
Yeah.
And even the family stories about the Tolkien side of the family were kind of
contrasting stories.
Yeah. Yeah. There was like one that said, they were Saxons and they owned land.
Right.
And they fled the Prussian invasion in 1756. And then there was Grace's version of the story.
Right.
Which was that there was a du téméraire.
Oh, wow.
Who escaped the guillotine.
Right, so a bit more romantic.
Yeah, way more romantic.
Yeah.
In 1794.
Okay.
And ended up becoming a clockmaker in London.
Okay.
And, it was not uncommon for middle-class families to create these more
romantic backstories.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting how that might have played a role in Tolkien's development.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fascinating, to think about him creating these histories for his world.
Yeah. So he felt a much stronger connection to his mom's side of the family.
Right.
The Suffields. Mm-hmm. They were from Evesham in Worcestershire. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because after they left South Africa, he felt like he was
homeless.
Yeah. He didn't really have a place that he felt he belonged.
And that crops up again and again in his work, that sense of displacement.
Yeah.
Think about the elves, leaving their homeland, and the hobbits longing for the Shire. There's a connection there,
Yeah. And so then we come to a really important place.
Yeah.
And this is Sarehole.
Okay.
And the book makes it really clear that this was a really, really important place in shaping his imagination. Mm-hmm. And so Sarehole was this little village. It was quiet. It was rural.
Yeah.
Just a few houses, a mill.
Right.
And very importantly, it had a deep sandy pit.
Okay.
Bordered by trees.
Right.
And this was so different from Birmingham.
Yeah. Totally different.
So they really got this sense of freedom there.
Yeah.
They could explore. And the book calls it, delicious terrors.
I love that.
Yeah. And they had these interactions with the locals.
Mm-hmm.
There was a farmer that they called the Black Ogre.
Okay.
Who would chase them.
Oh, wow.
If they were picking mushrooms.
Yeah.
And then there was the White Ogre.
Okay.
And they had to go through his land to get to the best blackberry bushes.
Okay.
And so, you can kind of
you see the seeds, right?
Right.
Like of these antagonists.
Yeah. So Hilary, his brother, He later said that, they spent these idyllic summers picking flowers and,
Right.
trespassing.
That's so great. Yeah.
Yeah. And, they had to kind of overcome these social hurdles with the local kids.
Okay.
Because they were the town boys, and there were differences in class and accent
Yes.
and dress and even some of their language.
Yeah. So a little bit of prejudice, right, in the village.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was there in Sarehole that Ronald really developed his love for botany.
Yeah.
And this wasn't just, oh, look at this tree, look at that flower.
No, it was deeper than that. It sounds like he was interested in the actual shapes, textures of the plants, particularly trees.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And he was really, really interested in trees. He would climb them, he would lean on them.
Yeah.
It even says that he would talk to them.
Yeah, I mean, that really reminds me of Treebeard.
Right, yeah.
From The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
So again, those seeds being planted.
So he even had this incident with a willow tree by the mill pond.
Okay.
That kind of connected back to his fascination with dragons.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was kind of scared of dragons.
Yeah.
But he was
fascinated.
Drawn to them.
Yeah.
He felt like a world that had the possibility of dragons was somehow better,
more magical.
Yeah. Than a world without them.
It's the possibility, right? It's like, you see a forest and it's like, oh, maybe there's a dragon in there,
right?
And that just makes it so much more interesting.
Right. And so he was so fascinated by dragons. Yeah. That when he was around 7 years old, he wrote his first dragon story.
Amazing.
And it was very simple.
Yeah.
He focused on what the book calls the philological aspect.
I love that.
They're so Tolkien, yeah.
Yeah, great dragon.
So Tolkien.
Yeah, so it's really interesting how even at that young age, he was connecting language and story together.
Absolutely. And that's a theme that continues right through his life.
And alongside all this blossoming imagination, there were some pretty big personal events happening in his life.
Okay.
And one of them was his mom, Mabel. She converted to Catholicism after his dad had died.
Yeah.
And so this was really big thing.
Yeah.
Because it meant that she lost a lot of financial support from Walter Enkleton.
Okay.
And then there was also a lot of hostility from the Enkletons and the Tolkiens.
Yeah, that's a tough position to be in.
Yeah. And so this was really hard on her.
Yeah.
It says
that a toll on her health.
Yeah, but it also says that she never wavered.
That's incredible.
In her commitment to her faith.
And it must have had an impact on her sons. To see that.
Yeah, and so, that's another theme that kind of shows up. In his work.
Absolutely, like standing up for what you believe in. Right. And that sort of unyielding conviction.
So eventually they had to leave Sarehole.
Oh, okay.
And the reason for this was Ronald was going to King Edward's school. Right. And the commute was just way too long.
Too long.
He was actually having to walk a lot of the way.
Wow.
At first. And then they were closer to the tram lines in Moseley, so they moved there.
Okay, so back to the city.
Back to Birmingham.
Yeah.
And this was really hard for Ronald. He described Birmingham as just overcrowded, noisy.
Right.
And it was such a big difference from
the tranquility of the countryside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it even affected his health.
It did, yeah.
He had some health issues. He missed some school.
Right.
But eventually, he
got used to it.
Yeah, he got used to it.
Yeah.
And he started to enjoy the school routine.
Right. It's interesting, isn't it? Because he really disliked Birmingham at first, but he really loved the school routine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is kind of interesting because there was one thing in particular that kind of caught his attention in Birmingham.
Okay.
And this was
what was it?
The names on the coal wagons.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he would see these names.
Okay,
like Nantiglow, Sengenid, Blaine Robonda.
Those are great words, yeah.
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 And he couldn't even pronounce them at first,
Yeah.
But this was actually his introduction
Really?
to the Welsh language.
Wow.
Um,
That's so fascinating.
yeah. And so later on, when
Yeah.
he actually took a train trip to Wales,
Yeah.
he saw all the Welsh station names,
Right.
and it really solidified that fascination with the language.
And it must have been incredible to him to see these, ancient
Yeah.
words just flashing by,
Yeah. Yeah. So it wasn't
Yeah.
it wasn't just, some dry
No.
academic thing.
No,
Wow.
this was beauty.
Yeah. So around this time, Mabel made the decision to pull Ronald out of school
Really?
temporarily.
Wow.
And she homeschooled him for a while.
Hey.
And it says that she was just so committed to her son's education. And this was a success
Yeah.
because just a few months later,
Okay.
Ronald won a scholarship and went back to King Edward's.
Yep.
Okay.
His brother Hilary, he wasn't so successful.
Oh.
And Mabel described him as dreamy and slow at writing.
Right. So a bit of a different personality.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Ronald's back in school.
Okay.
And he's having these literary experiences.
Right.
And one thing that really stood out was he really didn't like Shakespeare.
No.
No, especially Macbeth.
Really?
Yeah. He said that he really disliked
Yeah.
the way Shakespeare used
Yeah.
the moving Burnham wood.
Right. I've always found that to be kind of silly.
He wanted something more literal.
Right.
Something.
Like fantastical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is kind of interesting
Yeah.
because it really shows you
He does. Yeah.
his sensibility.
Yeah.
Even at that young age.
Yeah.
About how fantasy should work.
Should work.
He
Yeah.
wanted something
Yeah.
bigger, more epic.
And more believable, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like if the trees are gonna move,
Yeah.
let's make
Yeah.
it something really amazing.
Yeah. So he did have a teacher that he really liked,
Okay.
Mr. Brewerton,
Right.
who was a medievalist.
Okay.
And so, Mr. Brewerton,
Yeah.
he was a really positive
It
influence
sounds like it.
on Ronald.
Yeah.
He really fostered his love for
Yeah.
these older
Older texts.
forms of literature.
Yeah. And they moved again?
They did.
Right.
They moved to Rednall, which was near the Birmingham Oratory.
Okay.
And this gave them access to
Yeah.
the oratory grounds.
Yeah.
The little cemetery where Cardinal Newman was buried.
Okay.
And then the Lickey Hills.
Okay.
And so this was
Another new landscape.
another new landscape for them to
So
explore.
things to explore. Yeah.
And it says that there was this really kind woman,
Oh, nice.
Mrs. Till,
Okay.
and she was the postman's wife,
Right.
and she would, feed them.
That's so sweet.
Yeah, and so this
That
was,
saved her.
part of this support system that
Yeah.
Mabel built up.
Mm-hmm.
And then this really important figure enters the picture,
Sure.
Father Francis Morgan,
Okay.
and he became Ronald and Hilary's tutor,
Okay.
and their legal guardian after Mabel died.
Okay.
And he was just such a
Yeah.
strong and steady presence in their lives.
Yeah.
He actually supplemented Mabel's inheritance with his own money.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was able to do this because
Uh-huh.
at the oratory, they didn't have to give up their wealth,
Oh, okay.
when they joined. So he
Right.
had his own personal funds.
Right.
And he used those to make sure that the boys could continue
Wow.
their education.
That's so generous.
Yeah. So he was
Obvious.
really just a phenomenal person.
Yeah.
And Ronald started to associate the rural landscape
Mm-hmm.
with his memories of his mom,
Yeah.
and particularly Sarehole.
Right.
And so this connection between landscape and loss,
Yeah.
and this kind of
Yeah.
almost mystical love of nature.
Right.
That's a big part of his
Yes,
work.
It is.
And there was this period where he had to live with his Aunt Beatrice
Okay.
for a little while.
Yeah.
And it sounds like she gave him, the basic necessities,
Right.
but there wasn't a lot of emotional support there.
Okay.
And so,
Guys, see you in another podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel